September 14, 1943. A forward observation post 3 miles northwest of Battipaglia, Italy. Oberleutnant Friedrich Schwartz pressed the headset against his ear, listening through waves of static for confirmation that his message had reached battalion headquarters. The American assault had begun 30 minutes earlier, and he needed fire support from the regimental artillery battery positioned 7 kilometers to the rear. But the field telephone wire had been cut by American shelling, and the torn Fu-B radio set at battalion level was struggling to maintain contact through the morning fog that blanketed the Salerno plain. Schwartz had been a signals officer for 18 months. He understood the limitations of German tactical communications better than most infantry commanders. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. What he could not yet comprehend was that 600 meters to his south, an American rifle squad of 12 men possessed more reliable battlefield communication capability than his entire battalion of 840 soldiers. The previous morning, during a reconnaissance patrol near the Selle River, elements of Schwartz's company had overrun an American position and captured equipment, including rations, ammunition, and a peculiar backpack radio unit. The device, olive drab and surprisingly compact, bore the designation SCR-300 on a small metal plate. A signals sergeant had examined the captured radio briefly before higher command requisitioned it for technical analysis. The sergeant's only comment, "The Americans have given their infantry squads what we issue to regimental commanders." If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the no one in Schwartz's battalion yet understood what that captured radio represented. Within weeks, German signals intelligence would produce detailed technical assessments of the SCR-300. Within months, Wehrmacht field commanders would begin requesting similar equipment with increasing desperation. Within a year, the psychological impact of facing an enemy whose smallest tactical units could coordinate instantly, while German companies struggled to maintain contact with their battalion headquarters, would reshape German defensive doctrine across every theatre of operation. The transformation from confident professionals to soldiers fighting against a communication advantage they could not match had already begun. German signals officers who first examined captured SCR-300 radios experienced not just technological surprise, but a fundamental reassessment of what modern infantry combat required. They had believed their communications equipment was adequate, even superior in some respects. The Americans, they discovered, had redefined adequate by giving squad leaders communication capabilities that exceeded what German battalion commanders could achieve. The journey toward this moment of terrible clarity had its foundations in two fundamentally different approaches to tactical military communications. The German Wehrmacht had developed its signals doctrine during the interwar period, when resources were limited and the Treaty of Versailles restricted military development. German communications philosophy emphasized centralized control, with radio equipment concentrated at battalion level and above. Company commanders received one radio set to maintain contact with battalion headquarters. Platoons and squads relied on runners, field telephones with wire that had to be constantly laid and repaired, and visual signals including flares and flags. This system reflected both resource constraints and tactical doctrine. German infantry tactics in the 1930s emphasized close coordination between combined arms elements, tanks, artillery, and infantry working in concert under centralized command. Battalion and regimental staffs coordinated these combined arms movements. Company commanders executed orders within their sectors. Platoon leaders and squad leaders operated tactically within company boundaries, responding to immediate situations, but not requiring constant communication with higher command. The torn Fu-B series radios that equipped German battalions operated on high-frequency bands between 3 and 5 MHz. These backpack sets used amplitude modulation for voice transmission and continuous wave for Morse code. Maximum output power was 0.7 watts, providing theoretical range up to 15 kilometers under optimal conditions using Morse code, perhaps 5 to 8 kilometers for voice communication on favorable terrain. The equipment was robust, well-engineered, and met German doctrinal requirements for battalion-level communications. But the torn Fu-B had significant operational limitations. The radio could not be used effectively while moving. Setup required deploying a wire antenna, tuning the oscillator circuits, and establishing a relatively stable position. 2 soldiers were typically needed to operate the equipment, one handling the radio while another managed the battery pack and hand-cranked generator used when batteries were depleted. The high-frequency bands were subject to atmospheric interference, particularly during weather changes. Range varied dramatically based on terrain, time of day, and solar activity. Most critically, each battalion typically possessed only 4 to 6 of these radio sets, 1 at battalion headquarters and 1 assigned to each of the 3 or 4 rifle companies, plus perhaps 1 or 2 spares. This meant that at any given moment, a German battalion of 840 men had perhaps 4 functioning radios connecting its dispersed elements. Company commanders could contact battalion headquarters and sometimes communicate laterally with adjacent companies if they were close enough and on compatible frequencies. But below company level, radio communication simply did not exist. German platoon leaders, commanding approximately 40 to 50 men, had no organic radio equipment. Squad leaders, directing groups of 10 to 12 soldiers, certainly had none. If a German platoon leader encountered enemy positions and needed to request fire support, he sent a runner back to company headquarters. If the company commander agreed with the request, he used his single radio to contact battalion, which then coordinated with artillery. The entire process, assuming the runner reached company headquarters without being killed or wounded, typically required 15 to 30 minutes under favorable conditions, often much longer during active combat. German doctrine accepted these delays as inevitable friction of warfare. Command emphasis focused on thorough pre-battle planning, clear assignment of objectives, and trusting junior leaders to execute their missions with initiative when direct communication became impossible. The German concept of Auftragstaktik, mission-type orders, explicitly recognized that once battle commenced, small unit leaders would often operate independently, fulfilling their assigned mission based on commander's intent rather than constant direction from higher headquarters. This approach had proven effective during the early war campaigns. In Poland, France, and the initial phases of Operation Barbarossa, German tactical superiority and operational surprise often rendered communication limitations irrelevant. Battles moved too quickly for communications delays to matter decisively. By the time Allied forces could react to German movements, the tactical situation had already changed. German junior leaders, well-trained and confident, made decisions independently and pushed forward aggressively. But by September 1943, the tactical environment had shifted fundamentally. Allied forces, particularly American units in Italy, were no longer surprised or disorganized. They fought methodically, with strong artillery support and increasing air superiority. The static defensive battles developing across the Italian theatre exposed German communications weaknesses that rapid offensive operations had previously masked. When German companies tried to coordinate counterattacks against prepared American positions, their inability to rapidly mass fires or redirect supporting elements became critically evident. American forces, seemingly capable of calling down artillery fire within minutes of contact, consistently disrupted German tactical movements before they could develop momentum. Oberleutnant Schwartz represented thousands of German junior officers who gradually recognized that something fundamental had changed in infantry combat. The tactical balance that had favored German initiative and superior training was shifting toward opponents who could coordinate supporting fires and react to changing situations with inexplicable speed. What Schwartz and his contemporaries did not yet understand was that this shift was not primarily about training or courage or tactical doctrine. It was about communication technology deployed at the squad level, technology that gave American infantry capabilities their German counterparts could not match. The American approach to tactical communications had developed along entirely different lines. In 1940, as European armies clashed across France and the Low Countries, American military planners watched with growing concern. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The US Army ranked 18th in the world in size. Its equipment was obsolete, and its tactical doctrine was untested. But American industrial capacity offered one decisive advantage: the ability to mass-produce advanced technology in quantities that would have been impossible for any European power. The Signal Corps, working with private contractors like Galvin Manufacturing Company, later known as Motorola, received a mandate to develop portable radio equipment that could function at squad and platoon level. The goal was not merely to replicate German battalion-level capabilities in a smaller package, but to fundamentally rethink how tactical communications could enable infantry combat effectiveness. Engineer Daniel Noble, leading the development team, proposed using frequency modulation rather than amplitude modulation. FM transmission offered critical advantages: resistance to atmospheric interference, natural suppression of static, and the ability to operate multiple radios on closely spaced frequencies without mutual interference. The SCR-300 emerged from 18 months of intensive development and testing. The radio incorporated 18 vacuum tubes in a rugged steel case, designed to withstand infantry combat conditions. The unit operated in the 40 to 48 MHz frequency range, far higher than German HF sets, providing line-of-sight propagation that was predictable and relatively immune to the atmospheric conditions that plagued lower-frequency communications. The transmitter output power was 300 milliwatts, 0.3 watts, seemingly far less than the 0.7 watts of German battalion sets. But FM transmission efficiency meant that this lower power achieved practical range of 3 to 5 miles under typical combat conditions, sometimes extending to 8 or even 10 miles with favorable terrain and optimal antenna positioning. More importantly, the SCR-300 could be operated while moving. A single soldier carried the 32 to 38-pound backpack unit, with a handset connected by a flexible cord, allowing the operator to transmit and receive while walking or even running. Setup time was minimal: pull out the antenna, turn the power switch, wait 10 minutes for vacuum tubes to warm up, and the radio was operational. Frequency selection was accomplished by a simple tuning dial on the front panel, allowing operators to switch between 40 different channels quickly. The United States Army procured approximately 50,000 SCR-300 units during the war. By comparison, consider that the entire Wehrmacht produced perhaps 20 to 30,000 Torn Fu B sets across all variants during the same period, and these equipped formations from battalion level upward across 3 million men. American Doctrine called for one SCR-300 per infantry rifle platoon, sometimes multiple units per company, with additional sets for artillery forward observers, reconnaissance elements, and specialized units. An American infantry regiment of 3,000 men might have 30 to 40 SCR-300 radios in active use. A comparable German infantry regiment had perhaps 12 to 16 Torn Fu B sets total, most allocated at battalion and regimental headquarters level. The SCR-300 first saw combat in the Pacific Theater in August 1943 during operations at New Georgia. Combat reports were enthusiastic. Colonel Ankenbrandt informed General Meade that they are exactly what is needed for frontline communications in this theater. The main difficulty reported was keeping the units supplied with fresh batteries, each radio requiring a BA-70 or BA-80 battery pack that provided approximately 40 hours of operating time. By September 1943, SCR-300 units were arriving in Italy for the Allied invasion of the mainland following the Sicily campaign. German forces first encountered the SCR-300 during the Sicily operation in July and August 1943. Several units were captured during the fighting, and German signals intelligence began immediate technical analysis. The initial German response was professional admiration mixed with growing concern. The SCR-300 represented engineering approaches that German radio manufacturers had considered but rejected as too resource-intensive for mass production. The use of 18 vacuum tubes in a portable manpack unit seemed profligate to German engineers accustomed to working with severe material constraints. The FM transmission system was sophisticated, requiring precise oscillator circuits and specialized components that German industry struggled to produce in quantity. The American willingness to dedicate such advanced technology to squad-level equipment was startling. But what truly concerned German signals officers was not the technical sophistication of individual units, but the operational implications of American willingness to produce and field such equipment in overwhelming numbers. The mathematical reality became clear as German intelligence compiled reports from across multiple theaters. American infantry squads, the smallest tactical unit consisting of 10 to 12 men led by a sergeant, were routinely equipped with radio communication capability. German companies, formations of 150 to 190 men commanded by captains, typically had one radio for communication with battalion headquarters and no internal radio communication between platoons. An American infantry regiment might have more radios in its line companies than an entire German division had for all purposes. This disparity in communication capability translated directly into tactical flexibility and response time. When an American squad made contact with enemy forces, the squad leader could immediately radio his platoon leader, who could contact the company commander, who could coordinate with battalion fire support officers, all within minutes. Artillery fire could be adjusted in real time as the tactical situation developed. Reinforcements could be directed to specific locations based on current intelligence rather than outdated situation reports carried by runners. The German equivalent process, by contrast, required the squad leader to send a runner to the platoon leader, who sent a runner to company headquarters, where the company commander used his single radio to contact battalion, which coordinated through regimental channels to brigade artillery. Each step introduced delay and information loss. By the time supporting fires arrived, if they arrived at all, the tactical situation had often changed completely. American units could coordinate maneuvers at squad level that German formations attempted at battalion level. Oberfeldwebel Hans Richter, signals sergeant with the 29th Panzer Grenadier Division, wrote in a letter intercepted by Allied sensors and later filed in intelligence reports, "We captured one of their squad radios near Casino. It works better than our battalion sets. One American sergeant has better communication than our company commander. They can talk to each other constantly while moving. We must stop, set up antennas, crank generators. By the time we establish contact, the Americans have called in artillery and moved to new positions." The psychological impact on German junior officers was profound. They had entered the war confident in their tactical superiority, in their initiative, training, and ability to make rapid decisions independently. Now they faced opponents whose squad leaders could request and receive supporting fires with the same rapidity that German battalion commanders could barely achieve. The fundamental assumption underlying Auftragstaktik, that small units would operate independently because communication with higher command was impossible, had been undermined by an enemy who made small unit communication routine. German attempts to develop equivalent capabilities began almost immediately after the first SCR-300 units were captured and analyzed, but the obstacles were insurmountable given Germany's strategic situation by late 1943. Developing new radio equipment required engineering resources, specialized vacuum tubes, precision capacitors and oscillators, batteries, and most critically, time to design, test, and establish production lines. Germany, in 1943, was struggling to their purpose, maintain production of existing equipment under increasingly heavy Allied bombing. Raw material shortages affected every aspect of military production. Copper for wiring, aluminum for housings, specialized alloys for electronic components, all were in desperately short supply. Even if Germany could have developed an equivalent to the SCR-300, mass production would have required retooling factories, training new workers, and establishing supply chains for specialized components. The German electronics industry, sophisticated by European standards, simply lacked the industrial capacity and raw materials to produce tens of thousands of advanced portable radios while simultaneously maintaining production of existing military equipment. American industry, by contrast, had converted massive civilian radio production capacity to military use, leveraging expertise and infrastructure that had produced millions of consumer radios during the 1930s. The Feldfehl series of portable German radios that entered service in late 1943 and 1944 represented desperate attempts to provide squad-level communications. The Feldfehl B and Feldfehl C operated in VHF bands similar to the SCR-300 but with critical limitations. Output power was 0.15 watts, only 1/50th that of German battalion sets and half that of the SCR-300. Effective range was approximately 1.5 kilometers under good conditions, perhaps less in rough terrain or urban environments. The units were less rugged, less reliable, and far fewer were produced compared to German needs or American production numbers. By early 1944, the communication disparity had become a standard feature of German after-action reports from Italy, and increasingly from the Western Front as Allied forces prepared for the Normandy invasion. Wehrmacht officers noted repeatedly that American tactical responses seemed inexplicably rapid, that artillery fire arrived with disturbing precision and speed, that American units seemed to know German positions and movements almost instantly. Much of this effectiveness derived from superior American artillery doctrine and fire control systems, but the foundation was tactical communication that allowed American squad leaders to serve as the eyes and ears of an integrated fire support system. The Normandy invasion in June 1944 provided German forces with overwhelming evidence of American communication superiority at every tactical level. American airborne units dropping behind German lines on D-Day carried SCR-300 radios, along with the smaller SCR-536 handheld units. These paratroopers, scattered across the Cotentin Peninsula and often operating in small groups far from their parent units, maintained radio contact that allowed them to coordinate actions, call for fire support, and direct each other toward objectives. German forces attempting to contain the airborne penetrations found themselves fighting opponents who seemed to possess perfect situational awareness, despite being numerically inferior and operating in unfamiliar territory. On Omaha Beach, the most heavily contested of the American landing sectors, radio communication proved essential to recovering from near disaster. The initial assault waves suffered catastrophic casualties, with many units pinned down at the water's edge, unable to advance. But scattered junior leaders with radio contact were able to coordinate supporting naval gunfire, direct engineers to create paths through obstacles, and gradually organize small unit advances that broke through German defensive positions. Without tactical radio communications, the Omaha Beach landing might well have failed completely. German defenders, watching from cliff positions, could not understand how American forces maintained coordination despite the chaos and casualties below. The hedgerow fighting in Normandy during June and July 1944 demonstrated the tactical implications of communication disparity with brutal clarity. The bocage terrain of small fields bordered by thick hedgerows and sunken roads fragmented battlefields into countless small engagements. German doctrine anticipated that this terrain would favor defense, with limited visibility preventing attackers from coordinating movements and massing fires effectively. What German planners had not anticipated was that American squad leaders could use radio to maintain contact despite the hedgerows, calling for fire support on specific enemy positions, and coordinating flanking movements with adjacent squads that German platoon leaders could only dream of achieving. American combined arms tactics in the hedgerows relied absolutely on tactical radio communication. Tank infantry teams, with infantry squads equipped with SCR-300 radios operating alongside Sherman tanks fitted with vehicle-mounted radios, could coordinate movements in real time. Infantry would identify enemy anti-tank positions by radio, tanks would suppress those positions with main gunfire, and infantry would advance while tanks provided covering fire. The entire sequence happened within minutes, sometimes continuously as the tactical situation evolved. German infantry attempting similar combined arms coordination found themselves relying on hand signals and shouted commands over combat noise, with tanks and infantry often losing contact completely in the broken terrain. Hauptmann Werner Vogel, commanding officer of the 3rd Company, 578th Grenadier Regiment, wrote in his personal diary on July 23, 1944, "Today we attempted a company-level counterattack against American positions near Saint-Lô. I planned the movement carefully with my platoon leaders. We would advance in 3 prongs, each platoon moving independently but coordinating to envelop the American left flank. Within 10 minutes of beginning our movement, American artillery began falling on all 3 platoons simultaneously. They knew where we were before we had advanced 300 meters. My first platoon leader was killed by the initial barrage. I tried to redirect 2nd platoon by sending a runner, but by the time he arrived, that position was also under fire. We withdrew, having accomplished nothing except losing 18 men. The Americans can see everything, can respond to everything, instantly. How can we fight this?" Vogel's diary entry captured a reality that thousands of German officers were experiencing across all fronts by mid-1944. The tactical advantage that German forces had enjoyed during the early war years through superior training, initiative, and combined arms coordination had been systematically eroded by an enemy who possessed fundamental technological advantages in communication and fire control. But the full scope of this advantage only became clear when German signals intelligence completed detailed technical and operational assessments of captured American radio equipment. In October 1944, the Wehrmacht High Command distributed a classified technical intelligence report to signals officers at division level and above. The document, titled Enemy Tactical Communication Systems, Analysis and Implications, ran to 47 pages of dense technical analysis and operational commentary. The report had been compiled by signals specialists working under Oberst Heinrich Müller, Chief of Army Communications Intelligence, using information gathered from captured equipment, prisoner interrogations, intercepted radio traffic, and battlefield observations across all theatres. The report's technical section provided exhaustive detail on the SCR-300 specifications. The analysts noted the sophisticated heterodyne receiver design that provided excellent selectivity and sensitivity. They documented the FM transmitters, resistance to atmospheric noise, and its ability to operate on closely spaced frequencies without mutual interference. They analyzed the modular construction that simplified field maintenance and noted the rugged design that allowed the radio to function after being dropped, submerged briefly in water, or subjected to combat conditions that would destroy most German tactical radios. But the report's most devastating sections dealt not with technical specifications, but with operational implications. The analysts had calculated, based on prisoner interrogations and captured organizational documents, that a standard American infantry division of approximately 14,000 men deployed somewhere between 350 to 400 SCR-300 radios, along with several hundred of the smaller SCR-536 handheld units for squad-level internal communications. A German infantry division of similar size had perhaps 120 to 150 radios of all types, most of these at battalion level or above, with almost none available for platoon or squad use. The report included a detailed comparison table that laid out the mathematical disparity with clinical precision. An American infantry company of approximately 190 men typically had 6 to 8 SCR-300 radios, one for the company command post, one for each of the 3 rifle platoon leaders, 1 to 2 for weapons platoon elements, and 1 to 2 for attached forward observers. A German infantry company of similar size had 1 radio for communication with battalion headquarters. That was the entirety of its organic radio communication capability. At platoon level, the comparison became even more stark. An American infantry platoon of 40 to 45 men had its own SCR-300 radio operated by the platoon leader or platoon sergeant. The 3 rifle squads within that platoon often had SCR-536 handheld radios for internal coordination, giving the platoon leader the ability to direct all 3 squads simultaneously while maintaining contact with company headquarters. A German infantry platoon had 0 radios, The platoon leader communicated with his company commander by sending runners through whatever terrain separated them, often under fire, always with significant time delays. The operational implications section of the report analyzed how this communication disparity translated into combat effectiveness. The analysts identified 4 critical areas where American tactical communications provided decisive advantages. First, fire support coordination. American forward observers, equipped with SCR-300 radios, could identify targets and call for artillery fire within 2 to 3 minutes of initial contact. The radio link allowed for immediate fire adjustments based on visual observation. German forward observers, often relying on field telephones with wire that was constantly cut by artillery fire, required 10 to 20 minutes to complete similar fire missions, assuming wire communications remained intact. Second, situational awareness and command flexibility. American company and battalion commanders received continuous updates from subordinate units via radio, allowing them to maintain accurate understanding of the tactical situation as it evolved. They could redirect supporting fires, commit reserves to exploit opportunities, or reinforce threatened positions based on real-time information. German commanders at similar levels received situation reports via runners or through scheduled radio check-ins with subordinate companies, meaning their understanding of the battlefield was always minutes to hours out of date. By the time information reached them and they formulated responses, the tactical situation had often changed completely. Third, combined arms integration. American Doctrine emphasized close coordination between infantry, armor, artillery, and air support. This coordination was enabled by common radio equipment and standard operating procedures. An infantry platoon leader with an SCR-300 could communicate directly with supporting tanks using the same radio that connected him to his company commander and allowed him to request artillery fire. German combined arms coordination required multiple radio sets operating on different frequency bands, specialized liaison officers, and elaborate pre-battle planning to establish communication links that might work if all elements remained within range and terrain permitted signal propagation. Fourth, tactical resilience and adaptability. American units maintained combat effectiveness even when plans changed or casualties disrupted command structures. If a platoon leader was killed or wounded, the platoon sergeant assumed command and still had radio communication with company headquarters and with squad leaders. If circumstances required units to reorganize, split, or combine forces, radio communications allowed rapid coordination without elaborate planning. German units, heavily dependent on pre-battle plans and personal leadership by specific officers, often experienced command paralysis when plans went wrong or key leaders became casualties. The report concluded with a section titled Assessment of German Capabilities for Response that made for grim reading. The analysts evaluated 3 possible approaches to addressing the communications disparity. First, develop and produce German equivalents to the SCR-300 in sufficient quantities to equip platoons and squads throughout the Wehrmacht. Second, modify tactical doctrine to minimize the disadvantages of limited tactical communications. Third, target American communications equipment and operators to degrade enemy communication capabilities. The assessment of the first option was brutally honest. Germany in late 1944 lacked the industrial capacity, raw materials, and time required to develop and mass-produce squad-level portable radios in the quantities needed. Even the limited production of Feldfou series portable radios was straining available resources. The specialized vacuum tubes required for VHF-FM transceivers were in desperately short supply. Copper for windings and connections was being rationed across all military production. The precision capacitors and oscillators needed for stable FM transmission required manufacturing capabilities that were increasingly disrupted by Allied bombing of German industrial centers. The report estimated that even if all obstacles could be overcome, Germany might be able to produce 5,000 to 8,000 portable squad radios annually, compared to American production of the SCR-300 alone, exceeding 20,000 units per year, with additional production of other tactical radio equipment. The numerical disparity could not be closed through German production increases. The industrial capacity simply did not exist, and by late 1944, the overall strategic situation made long-term production planning increasingly meaningless. The second option, modifying tactical doctrine to compensate for communications limitations, received more detailed analysis. German forces had already begun implementing some adaptive measures. Defensive positions were being constructed with emphasis on fields of fire that allowed visual communication between positions. Attack plans increasingly relied on simple, clear objectives that could be executed without constant communication with higher headquarters. Units practiced fighting in small, self-contained groups that could operate independently when communication was lost. But the analysts noted that these adaptations, while necessary, were fundamentally reactive. They mitigated some disadvantages of poor tactical communications, but could not create the positive capabilities that American forces possessed. German units could reduce their vulnerability to communication disruption, but they could not match American ability to concentrate fires rapidly, maintain situational awareness across distributed forces, or coordinate complex combined arms movements in real time. The communication disparity remained a fundamental disadvantage that tactical adaptations could not overcome. The third option, targeting American communications, had already been attempted with limited success. German forces specifically targeted soldiers carrying backpack radios, recognizing that the distinctive antenna and radio equipment marked them as high-value targets. American radio men suffered higher casualty rates than average infantrymen, particularly in the early stages of campaigns when German forces still possessed effective artillery and mortar fire. But the sheer number of radios in American units meant that destroying individual sets rarely disrupted communications for long. Units carried spare radios, and soldiers were cross-trained on radio operation so that casualties to radiomen did not eliminate communication capability. German radio intercept and direction-finding efforts attempted to exploit American tactical radio traffic for intelligence and targeting. But the frequency-hopping capabilities of American radio networks, combined with brief transmission times and the use of proper radio procedure that minimized valuable intelligence in routine traffic, limited the effectiveness of German signals intelligence at tactical levels. American forces learned quickly that radio discipline and proper authentication procedures protected them from the German intercept capabilities that had proven so effective against less sophisticated opponents earlier in the war. The October 1944 intelligence report concluded with a stark assessment that reflected professional competence combined with recognition of unpleasant reality. The American advantage in tactical communications, particularly at platoon and squad levels, represents a fundamental superiority that German forces cannot match given current industrial and resource constraints. This advantage translates directly into superior coordination of fires, more rapid tactical responses, and better situational awareness at all command levels. German forces can adapt tactically to minimize some disadvantages, but cannot eliminate the basic disparity. American tactical communications superiority, combined with their advantages in artillery, air support, and logistics, creates a combat environment where German forces fight at systematic disadvantage, regardless of individual unit quality or tactical skill of leaders. Oberleutnant Friedrich Schwarz, the signals officer introduced at the beginning of this account, received a copy of this report in November 1944. His unit was by then fighting in the Hürtgen forest, a nightmarish environment where the dense evergreen canopy and broken terrain made all communications difficult and tactical coordination nearly impossible. By this point in the war, Schwarz had personally witnessed the operational implications of American communications superiority in dozens of engagements. He later wrote in a letter to his wife, intercepted by Allied postal censors and preserved in intelligence files, "We have received official confirmation of what every soldier in the field already knows. The Americans can talk to each other constantly, from the smallest squad to the highest headquarters. We must rely on runners and hope that wire connections are not cut by the next artillery barrage. It is like fighting an opponent who can see the entire battlefield while we peer through a keyhole. They coordinate their fires in minutes. We require hours to achieve what they do instantly. The report uses technical language and careful analysis, but the conclusion is simple. We cannot win a radio war against an enemy who produces their squad radios in greater numbers than we produce all military radios combined. The psychological impact of this realization extended far beyond individual officers like Schwartz. The German military had entered World War II, confident in its tactical and operational superiority. German officers believed, with considerable justification based on early campaigns, that superior training, initiative, and tactical skill gave them advantages that could overcome numerical and material disadvantages. The concept of Auftragstaktik, mission-type tactics emphasizing decentralized decision-making and junior leader initiative, was predicated on the assumption that well-trained German officers and NCOs would outperform their opponents in fluid tactical situations. But American tactical communications fundamentally undermined this assumption. The advantage of independent junior leader initiative became irrelevant when American junior leaders possessed better situational awareness and faster access to supporting fires than German battalion commanders. The benefit of decentralized execution was negated when American forces could centralize critical decisions while maintaining distributed formations. German tactical excellence, real though it was, could not overcome American ability to see the battlefield more clearly, respond more quickly, and coordinate more effectively at every level from squad to corps. By early 1945, as German forces fought desperately to delay Allied advances from west and east, the communication disparity had become one of many insurmountable disadvantages. Fuel shortages limited German mobility. Artillery ammunition was rationed to a few shells per gun per day. Air superiority allowed Allied aircraft to attack German positions and movements with near impunity. Replacements for casualties were increasingly poorly trained and equipped. Against this backdrop of comprehensive material and numerical inferiority, the lack of tactical communications was merely one more factor ensuring defeat. Yet, in the memories of German soldiers who survived the war, the inability to communicate effectively in combat remained a source of particular frustration. Veterans' accounts written decades after 1945 repeatedly mentioned the psychological impact of fighting opponents who seemed to possess supernatural awareness of German positions and movements. Only gradually did many veterans learn that this apparent supernatural awareness was simply the product of good tactical communications combined with effective intelligence gathering and fire control systems. In 1953, 8 years after the war's end, a small group of former Wehrmacht signals officers met informally in Frankfurt to discuss their wartime experiences. Among them was Friedrich Schwartz, who had survived the war and was working as an electrical engineer in civilian life. The group spent an evening reviewing the October 1944 Technical Intelligence Report, now declassified and available through American military archives. Their discussion, recorded informally by one participant, revealed how veterans processed the technological disparities that had shaped their combat experiences. Reading this report again after so many years, Schwartz said to the assembled group, "I am struck by how clearly the analysts saw what we could not achieve. They documented the exact nature of our disadvantage with precision. They calculated the numerical disparities in equipment. They analyzed the operational implications correctly, and they concluded, rightly, that we could not overcome the gap. What the report could not capture was the psychological experience of fighting under these conditions. Every engagement, every defensive position, every counterattack attempt, we knew the Americans could coordinate faster than we could respond. We planned operations knowing that American artillery would arrive before we could adjust to changing circumstances. We sent runners knowing they might not survive the journey. We watched American units maneuver with precision that seemed impossible for infantry formations, and we understood, gradually, that we were not being outfought by superior soldiers. We were being defeated by superior communication technology, married to industrial capacity we could never match." Another veteran, Former Hauptmann Karl Weber, who had commanded an infantry company in France during 1944, added his perspective. The SCR-300 was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It killed no one directly, but it enabled everything that did kill. It allowed American artillery to find us, American air support to strike our positions, American maneuvers to coordinate in ways we could not counter. When we captured one of these radios and examined it, we saw good engineering but nothing magical. 18 vacuum tubes, FM transmission, rugged construction. German engineers could have designed similar equipment, but Americans produced it by the tens of thousands and gave it to their squad leaders. We could not match this, not because we lacked the technical knowledge, but because we lacked the industrial power and resources. The war was decided by production capacity, and the SCR-300 was simply one clear example of how American industry translated capability into tactical advantage. The group discussed how German forces had attempted to compensate for communications limitations through training, pre-battle planning, and tactical adaptations. They acknowledged that some measures had been effective at the margins. Well-trained German units fighting from prepared positions could achieve local successes, even against communications superior opponents. Careful planning and rehearsal could enable complex operations despite limited ability to communicate during execution. Defensive tactics that emphasized mutual support between positions reduced reliance on communication with higher headquarters, but all agreed that these adaptations, while professionally competent, were ultimately exercises in minimizing disadvantage rather than creating advantage. German forces throughout the latter half of the war fought under systematic communication constraints that American forces simply did not experience. This disparity affected everything from small unit tactics to operational planning. It shaped how defensive positions were constructed, how reserves were positioned, how artillery was employed, and how combined arms operations were coordinated or, more often, not coordinated. The Frankfurt meeting concluded with a discussion of what lessons the SCR-300 story held for understanding modern warfare. The veterans agreed that technological superiority, when combined with the industrial capacity to mass-produce and field advanced equipment in decisive quantities, created advantages that traditional military virtues of courage, training, and tactical skill could not overcome. They noted that post-war developments, including the proliferation of portable radio equipment in all armies and the development of even more sophisticated communications technology, had made the lessons of 1943 through 1945 permanently relevant. The American gift for mass production, Schwartz observed, was perhaps their greatest military asset. They did not invent radio communications. They did not pioneer FM transmission. German scientists and engineers understood these technologies perfectly well, but Americans had the industrial capacity and organizational skill to produce practical equipment in quantities that made technological capability into operational reality. The SCR-300 was not a miracle weapon. It was simply good technology, well engineered, produced in overwhelming numbers, and integrated into tactical doctrine that exploited its capabilities fully. That combination, repeated across countless equipment types and weapon systems, was what defeated us. Not American soldiers, who were often brave and well led, but American industry, which gave those soldiers tools we could not match. The story of German forces encountering the SCR-300 and realizing they could not match American tactical communications is ultimately a story about industrial warfare in the 20th century. Traditional military culture emphasized human factors: courage, discipline, training, leadership, tactical skill. These factors remained important, and German forces demonstrated all of them in abundance throughout the war. But industrial warfare added a new dimension where material factors, production capacity, technological sophistication, and the ability to field advanced equipment in decisive quantities became paramount. German military excellence, real though it was, could not overcome systematic material disadvantage across multiple domains simultaneously. Communications was one domain among many where Allied superiority, particularly American superiority, manifested clearly. but it was a critical domain because communications enabled everything else. Superior American artillery was more effective because communications allowed for rapid targeting and adjustment. Superior American air support was more decisive because communications allowed ground forces to direct strikes accurately. Superior American logistics sustained operations because communications coordinated supply movements efficiently. The soldiers who served in German forces during the war's later stages understood that they were fighting at systematic disadvantage. Many fought with skill and courage despite knowing the ultimate outcome was determined by factors beyond their control. The psychological burden of this knowledge, combined with the physical hardships of sustained combat under increasingly desperate conditions, shaped their wartime experience in profound ways. Understanding how outmatched they were in tactical communications was part of the larger realization that Germany had entered a war it could not win once the conflict became an industrial contest. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.